Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And welcome to episode 80, is that right?
80?
I think 90?
80.
It's season 8, episode 10, yeah.
80.
Episode 80, amazing.
You know what the best part is? We're now high enough in the numbers where we can confuse 80 and 90. You know, when we hit episode 10 or episode 20, you don't mistake that for an episode 10 episodes up or down. So, yeah.
For those who missed it last week, we set up some parameters for this week. As we do for every finale, we like to do a little bit of a deck building exercise. And this deck this week, because we have fully gone through this year's standard rotation, we didn't do our episode like we did last year where we look at some of the cards. There's so many that are rotating at a standard, so we decided to make decks out of them. So our restrictions for these decks are starting with Call Time, ending with AFR, AFC. So like the Adventures in Forgotten Realm commander decks are the last part. The beginning part are Call Time and Call Time commander decks. So we wanted to choose any standard legal set and any commander decks, not including Commander Legends. And I don't think either of us chose any cards in like the Double Masters type stuff.
No. I stayed just with those particular ones. It's interesting because we took what used to be the Brawl restriction of a standard format and built a deck. But then we decided, well, no, we're Commander, so we should include all the Commander cards.
For sure.
And make an entire Commander deck. So,
do you know how hard that is to do without, your Soul Rings, your...
Oh, I do now.
'Cause, I mean, for the most part, most of these cards are first printed in these four... I'm going to just call them four sets because it was the standard set and their Commander product counterpart. And, yeah, wow, I think, there's probably like one or two cards here or there, and you know what? That's fine. So, what was your experience like with this?
My experience was when we were talking about this, and we were like, okay, so we should use any card in those commander decks, and I said, well, that doesn't seem fair because, then we get then we're getting access to Soul Ring and Arcane Signet, and essentially pre-built decks. I mean, in theory, if that's the way we were going to do it, we could just take one of the precons and say, hey, look, it's my deck. And I didn't want to do that. So I thought, let's just stay with the cards within this time parameter. And wow, that was way harder than I thought. If I had realized how difficult that was going to be, I would never have made that suggestion. This was easily one of the most difficult decks to build, just because you're constantly trying to keep track of what cards you're allowed to put in it, and you're also trying to get, the basics, the stuff that you need.
Any fixing, any ramp, trying to use what's there is sometimes difficult if those colors aren't known for that thing. I mean, I know I may spoil it a bit. I know that you had originally gone with Essica and the Rainbow Bridge. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Something?
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to be difficult in general. And it's so easy, too, when you think about, standard legal, to think about ramp and stuff, because, they need to build that into the format. But if you're taking... I mean, literally a third of, or even a half of standard, you might not get it in the colors you need.
Right, and I kept looking at, part of the reason I decided not to go with Essica, on top of the fact that I knew this was going to be very difficult, because obviously it's 5 colors.
Yeah.
The problem is that you want to run the Prismatic Bridge, or you want to play that out before you're playing Essica. Because I don't want to have to pay 7, so I don't want to pay Wooburg and then 2 more to get the bridge out. I want that to come first. But the best way to do that is to have Essica out first. So then I started looking at this going, okay, well, is there a way that I can copy Essica? And I'm like, no, this is just going to be insane. And then I'm like, okay, now let's look at all of the legendary creatures, because there's no color restriction on this anymore. I'm just like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. And on top of that, I just didn't think this was going to be that. I didn't even think the deck was just going to be the very good, because I started looking at this and thinking, my entire deck is going to revolve around this plan, and if the legendary creatures that I'm finding aren't, explosive gangbusters, then it's just kind of dull. So I audibled out and went with something else. So
yeah, it's definitely tough when because I mean, obviously Essica would be great in like a 60 card deck where you can have multiple copies. You can have Essica out and then the Prismatic Bridge both on the battlefield at the same time. But when it's on the same card, what do you do? But I think, regardless, neither of us went with Essica because of these tight restrictions.
Right.
And even so, like, I'm fairly happy with my deck, but as we'll all see soon, I think of mine more as like a first draft. I think that it could hold itself for a couple games here and there, but I think if anything, it could be honed even to my standard of unoptimized jank.
Right. This was, for me, a deck building exercise with a limited card pool like I rarely ever do. It really brought me back to early Magic when I was building decks with the cards that I had, and that was the limited card pool. And so you would put the deck together using as best you could with what you had, and for the most part it was kind of jank. But it was, that's what I was doing, and that's what I see here as well with my deck as well. I think I'm with you. It feels like a first draft, but it was nice to go through and actually to take a more careful look at a lot of cards that normally I would just pass over because I've got the staples. My ramp package is going to be similar from one deck to the next, especially in a particular color. Whereas this time around, obviously the ramp package is different because I'm only using cards from those 2 years.
Yeah, so I guess for me, a little difficult. There were some cards that I ended up having to just kind of throw in there because they fit, I guess. I'll start and we'll take it from there. So my deck revolved around Carter the Doomscourge, which was a deck that I have wanted to build since I saw the card originally previewed, and it made me really excited to come back to it now and be like, oh, I want to build a Goad deck. It's going to be so cool with all these Goad things out. And before I get to that, I'm going to read the card. It's red, black, and 2. So 4 mana for a 4/3 legendary creature, Demon Berserker. When Carter Doomscourge enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. So, when it enters the battlefield, the creatures that are on the battlefield that are your opponents are goaded, essentially.
Right.
And whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So, the idea behind the deck is to goad things and let them die. Let them kill each other. Or at least so I thought.
So, Andy.
Yeah.
I will say, when you told me you were building with Carter, I was a little surprised because you picked an uncommon as opposed to any of the rares or the mythics you could have picked.
I do love those uncommon commanders.
Right. And all I saw with this was, oh, too bad Eldrazi Displacer isn't in this bunch. Because the idea of being able to blink him every turn, I mean, sure, you can't attack with him, but you're getting that ability where all of your opponents are swinging elsewhere over and over again. And I'm just like, wow. But
yeah, that was the first place. That was one of the 2 first places that my mind went. Was one, let's goad as many things as possible. Because I knew that there were a lot of goad cards coming out in the past 2 years. Thing I didn't take into account is that they were all after AFR. There are 3 goad cards that I could fit in here. Vengeful Ancestor, Karazakar, and Geode Rager. 2 of which came from commander decks from AFR, and Geode Ranger just came from Zendikar. Yeah, I mean, they do the thing. There's only 3 of them, so you have 4 cards total in the deck that goad things, but you know what? It's fine. Right. So then my mind went, okay, this is an ETB. How do I blink it? Do you know how many cards there are that blink things in these 4 sets? 0. In black and red. So the route I went with that is, for lack of a better term, graveyard recursion. So either things that are life insurance, like Malakir Rebirth, Feign Death, Demonic Gifts, things that when it dies it just immediately comes back, or things like Agadeem's Awakening, Carter's Vicious Return, which, I mean, I had to put in there.
Of course.
Flavor. Or Incarnation Technique, which is just stuff that takes it from the graveyard, puts it directly on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 main pillars of this deck are like, all right, take things out of the graveyard, put it onto the battlefield, or goad things so that your opponent's creatures die and you get a little bit of value. Where I kind of went after that was understanding that, oh, actually, this says whenever an attacking creature dies. So I was like, I can attack. I can do that. And then if they die, great. I just have to make sure they die during combat, or at least during the combat phase. So found some token makers because I was like, what's the easiest way to get creatures in this deck while still getting the value of things dying?
Yeah.
And it's tokens. It's always tokens.
Right.
At least for me. So I went with Feign. I went with Death Tyrant. Blight Mound was a really cool idea because not only are they tokens that when they die, I gain life even more. So it kind of like builds on Carter's second line.
Right.
But, Blight Mound, Sedgemoor Witch, there were a few token makers that would give me life eventually. But then I also went Triplicate Titan because, of course you do, because it's a great card.
Hey, why not?
Colorless and makes tokens, kind of, but also really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's a way I can recur that, go for it.
Right.
And then I came across Wand of Orcus, and this card's messed up.
Have
you read this card before?
No.
Wand of Orcus is 2 and a black for legendary artifact, equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control gain Death Touch till end of turn. Already amazing. It's got an equipped cost of 3, so for 6 mana you can get it onto the battlefield and onto a creature, or over 2 turns get it onto something. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens.
Right, so this doesn't need to be a zombie deck. He makes his own zombies.
Yeah. So, you give it any sort of evasion. I mean, it gives itself Death Touch, so it already disincentivizes your opponents from blocking.
Right.
And you get so many zombies. And then, you just attack in, and if they die, you get the triggers off of Carter, or they get through and you deal damage. So it's a lose-lose for your opponent. It's great. But then I thought to myself, what if your opponents don't block? And sure, they'll die because of damage.
Yeah.
But, your deck doesn't do deck. It does damage, and that's great, and you win. Hooray! But if your plan is to have things die and trigger Carter, I figured I need any sort of sacrifice outlets. Which, again, not a lot, or at least not a lot of great ones, which led me to realize more that this deck is just a great jumping off point. You fill it up with old staples like Ashnod's Altar and stuff. But, I mean, even so, it gave me a lot of ideas for sacrifice outlets just in general. I mean, we've got Immersturm Predator, which, fascinating card. 2 black and a red for a 3/3 flyer, Vampire Dragon. Awesome. Whenever it becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target creature from a graveyard. Could be yours, could be your opponent's. Put a +1/+1 counter on Immersturm Predator. Sacrifice another creature. Immersturm Predator becomes indestructible until end of turn. Tap it. So, facing Wrath, easy. Facing literally anything, easy. But also you get that dies trigger. As long as you sacrifice during combat still. But yeah, There was a surprisingly low amount of places to just sacrifice things. But I mean, also through removal, you can use removal on your own things sometimes, which can be cool. So like Eradicator Valkyrie was one of my interesting cards that I found in this whole thing that I really wanted to put a spotlight on. It's a mythic from Call Time. It's black 2 for a 4/3 flying lifelink hexproof from Planeswalkers, which I haven't really had the experience of needing, but it is helpful out there. It's an Angel Berserker. You notice that Berserker comes up again.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got Boast, which says activate this ability only if the creature attacked this turn and only once each turn. So for 1 and a black, during combat or after combat, you can tap 1 black and sacrifice a creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or Planeswalker. So the idea here is you attack before blockers are declared, you make them sacrifice their creature, and ta-da! Like, you can get in. It's just another good sack outlet, but also, like, you get value out of.
Yeah.
There were so many cards after looking through all these that I realized were either from the Forgotten Realms or from Strixhaven that I was just like, oh wow, like a lot. Like, I liked those two sets so much more than I thought I did.
Right.
If only because of like a handful of cards that just really did what I wanted to do in Commander, which was like use the table as like a group rather than 4 people against each other.
Right. I can really see. I understand why you put Reckless Endeavor in. I think that's a very Andy card. The idea of being able to scoop that much treasure and do that much damage to each creature. I mean, it essentially is wipe the board. Oh, and by the way, here's a big bonus mana so that you can be the first one to get creatures back.
And I love, too, that like you don't have to choose which die until after you roll it. So you could potentially, roll a 1 and a 12.
Yeah.
And then be like, okay, I guess I'll just do 1 damage to everything and make 12 treasure. And like maybe nothing dies, but you just made 12 treasure out of 7.
Right.
So, like, even worst case scenario, I mean, I guess 1 and 12 isn't the worst case scenario, but, worst case scenario, it feels like a big goof, and, like, that's hilarious.
Right. And I mean, for Reckless Endeavor, I mean, a D12, the average roll on a D12 is 6.5.
Right.
Well, it costs 7, but you're rolling 2 dice.
Yeah.
So you can always, most of the time, according to the averages, you should half of the time be able to get enough treasure to make up the cost of the card.
Yeah. Or in the very least, you're banking 6 and, you paid 1.
Right. Or you're looking at it
get
saying
6 damage on everything.
I'm probably going to be able to put 6 damage on everything. And I mean, there are plenty of, not necessarily this deck, but there are plenty of other decks where that level of damage per creature comes in huge. Like, I can really see Reckless Endeavor working well in a Angel Song and Sunspeaker deck.
Oh my!
This card gets lifelink, and that kind of craziness. But yeah, no, I really like Reckless Endeavor. I mean, I appreciate that. It's a 7-mana sorcery. I get that, but I still like it.
Oh, absolutely! It's a great card, but it was tough to not leave the cards from Strixhaven and Commander 21 and the Forgotten Realms decks that I love. So I have a little category here called Value is Fun, and most of it, not all of it, is playing with your opponent's cards, and a lot of them are just like fun, get things for free type stuff.
Right.
Bergie is here for once to for that second line. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of their turns rather than once. We'll get to the Berserkers in a bit, but most of them have boast abilities. And so I was like, when I was adding all the Berserkers, I was like, I need to put Bergie in this deck, if only so I can actually use her second ability. But if you're not finding your Berserkers, you can always use the backside of Bergie to get some of that impulsive draw out.
Right.
And it's great. That card is just phenomenal. And I cannot believe it's $6 to $7 right now.
Yeah. Well,
component
just
pouch
goes
is
in
just...
every red deck, so it's
easy. Right? But then my deck was 40 cards, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I added it in some very basic mana rocks, because I needed them.
Yeah.
Even though this can create some treasure, I still needed mana rocks. I added in some card draw. Obviously, we talked a little bit about sacrifice engines, so like Deadly Dispute. Cosmos Elixir, both lands on the life gain stuff. Oh yeah, I didn't even talk about that. While I was thinking about pests, I was thinking about life gain matter stuff. So I added in some life gain matter stuff. So like whenever you gain life, because also Carter gains you life, you've got a few cards here and there that care about that.
Right.
They're not like amazing that I need to highlight any of them. But you got Siren Swarm, which gets +1s. Marauding Blight Priest, which each opponent loses another life. Essence Pulse, which will ultimately build up, so then you can do a board wipe. Vein Witch Coven, which is kind of cool. Actually, it's very cool. Whenever you gain life, you may pay a black. If you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So if something dies, makes you gain life, you can pay black to get it back. It's really good, actually. Card draw is just kind of it's fine. A lot of stuff that relies on you either sacrificing something or losing life in some way.
Right. I like the use of the Zephyr Boots here. I love the idea that you've got a deck that really does want to attack, and you're going to put it on a creature that wants to attack, so you can draw the card, and it offers up some evasion as well. So you can, make it more likely that you're going to draw that card. I like that.
Oh, absolutely. What I like here too is that like you can put it on a creature that you want to die. It gets in, it does the damage, and then you sack it to one of your sacrifice outlets, still in combat, and just kind of like stack the triggers so that
you're still getting to draw.
You get the card draw, you get whatever kind of death triggers you need. But I would say here, a card that I'm fully on board with and have been for a while is Keen Duelist. I know that once I played this card once, I went out and bought a playset. And I'm almost positive I've talked about it on this podcast before. For 1 and a black, it's a 2/2, and it's a human wizard that essentially, I'm not going to read the text out loud right now because a lot that just feels jumbly, but basically you and chosen opponent at the beginning of your upkeep reveal a top card and you duel. So it's like you get dealt damage equal to their CMC, or mana value, and vice versa. So, I show a land, you don't get hit. You show Blightsteel Colossus, I get hit for 10. But is Blightsteel Colossus 10?
I don't remember, but I get the idea
Whatever
of what
it
we're
is.
doing. Yeah.
And then I was very close to being done with that. And I was like, you know what? I feel like I remember cards from Kaldheim that said the word Berserker or cared about being a Berserker. And you know what Carter is a Berserker.
Right.
So typed into Scryfall, I was like, I'm looking for things that say Berserker. And I found a bunch of them. Now, because I was dealing with these 4 sets, I had to add almost all of them.
Right.
I think there was probably like a handful that I didn't, because they were just like, oh, this is a 3/3 with haste. It's like, cool. Not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But kind of going back to Bergie, a lot of these have boast triggers or boast things. A lot of them, Skemfar Avenger. Yeah, Skemfar Avenger, 1 and a black, a 3/1. Whenever another non-token elf or berserker you control dies, you draw a card and lose a life. But if it's attacking, then you then also gain a life because of Carter. Blood Sky Massacre says on its second chapter, whenever a berserker attacks this turn, you draw a card and lose a life, which is amazing if you've got a lot of berserkers.
Right.
I've got a couple. Fearless Liberator makes berserker tokens as well. Cleaving Reaper is just like a fun little one that you can bring back from the graveyard if you had a berserker enter the battlefield this turn. Axguard Cavalry is just a fun one that just gives things haste. It's perfect for a 2-drop.
Right.
And so I kind of rounded the deck off with the tribal kind of thing going on the best I could. Because I needed creatures badly, in a bad way. I think I still ended up with 30 creatures, which is kind of where you want it to be, but I was at, 20 creatures at the time.
Right.
So Witch's Clinic is a fascinating little land. It adds colorless, which can be helpful sometimes, depending on your deck. So, one, it adds colorless, which means it can go in any deck. And then for 2 and tap, so essentially 3 mana, target commander gains lifelink till end of turn.
Right.
Now, obviously, this can go so many ways. It's flexible, yes. We talk about this all the time. If it doesn't say you control or you own, then yeah, you can help out a buddy if need be.
Right.
But Carter doesn't have lifelink. You just add lifelink whenever you need to. And it's not necessarily when it attacks.
Right. I mean, Witch's Clinic, this is a card that, in theory, can go into virtually, every Voltron deck can use Witch's Clinic. The only question is whether or not you can make it work in the mana base. Any commander that does damage in some kind of way, not necessarily even combat. If you've got a commander that does 1 point of damage to all creatures on the battlefield, then gain life. Then suddenly, if that commander has lifelink, you're gaining a pile of life. This is just such a nice restart with a whole lot of commanders. I think that's, I think it's an easy include in a lot of the decks. I mean, if I can make the mana base work, I'll run it and yen it. I'll do all kinds of other options. So.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of really most of the deck, and just it made me realize how much I loved a lot of these sets that I had seen. I mean, I was really invested in Strixhaven. I was really invested in the AFR decks, and the commander decks, and the set itself. And I mean, it does the thing that I want it to do. It does the magic thing. And adding Carter at the beginning kind of made me realize that there was a lot from Kaldheim that I had missed that I really loved. And I think, going forward, I could take this deck easily, turn it into some sort of Goad deck, because, I mean, since then we've had so much Goad being printed. And it could easily be like a fair, fun deck.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of Goad and Commander Legends, and we're not using any of those cards here. So that's, Legends of Commander's Legends Baldur, the Baldur's Gate version.
Yeah.
So Commander Legends too, but I think this is. I think you can definitely take it along that route.
Yeah, I'm excited for this deck. Obviously, we'll have the deck list in the show notes. We're a little long right now. I'm clearly out of practice here, so we're gonna cut to commercial break, and when we get back, we're gonna talk about your deck, Bruce.
Well, my deck is monocolored, so it'll only take half as long. We'll be fine.
Oh, really? We'll be right back.
This episode of Temple of False Pot is brought to you by Witch's Clinic.
Come on down to the clinic and we'll get you all fixed up. Don't ask what is in it, just we'll get you fixed up. It's the clinic and we're witches, so Witch's Clinic. Now back to you. We're back. I got some water. I've got the cat somewhere over here. I think he's in that box.
All right.
Feeling good. Turn the AC on. It's getting a little cooler in here.
Yeah.
Bruce, how are you feeling about your deck?
Well, so the commander I chose was Kolvori, God of Kinship. It's costs 2 and 2 green for a 2/4 legendary creature god. And it says, as long as you control 3 or more legendary creatures, Kolvori gets +4/+2 and has vigilance. And then the next ability is spend 1 and a green and tap it, and look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a legendary creature card from among them. Put it into your hand, and then you put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, it's a flip card. So on the other side of the card, we have the Ringheart Crest. It costs 1 and a green. It's a legendary artifact, and it reads, as the Ringheart Crest enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You can tap it to add green, spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, or a legendary creature spell. This deck really doesn't have a creature theme, so you're probably going to be choosing a different creature type based on whatever cards are in your hand. There are probably more elves than anything else in the deck, but honestly, I haven't gone through to take a look. The deck was primarily there for Kolvori. It's far less about playing out my an artifact that taps for green that I can only use for a handful of the cards in the deck. So I love the idea of playing all these legendary creatures. Not surprisingly, when you're dealing with just these 4 sets, finding mono green legendary creatures was a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be. So there aren't nearly as many legendary creatures as I would put in here otherwise. But it was a great place to start, and I went from there. And then added in what I thought were enough legendary creatures that I think you will come pretty close to hitting one every 6 cards, assuming the average is right. And that's basically how I got started. Now, obviously, once I got through, found all the legendary creatures, had a general idea of what they do, and then I started extrapolating from there, looking at removal, looking at ramp, looking at some card draw, and trying to make it make sense with that theme. And that worked out fairly well, I thought. Like I said before we started, a lot of your standard cards, like the removal or the card draw, quite often you go to you've got your go-tos that repeat over and over in your decks because you know them and you know how well they work. For this time around, there was no go-to because most of these cards were going to be cards that were new to me, and a lot of them were going to be just variations. Like some of them I don't think are as good as, obviously not as good as the standard stuff, but there were others in here that I was surprised that were that good, and it just sort of went on from there.
Yeah, I always love to see tempting contract in people's decks.
Well, I loved any of the cards that do that tempt thing. Invariably, always somebody else that needs it in some way. So, sorry, for people who don't know Tempting Contract, it's a 4-mana artifact. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent may create a treasure token. For each opponent who does so, you create a treasure token. So ideally, you're getting 3 treasures per turn. Practically speaking, you're probably getting 1. So much of it depends on what the first person does.
Yeah.
If you can convince that first person to take it, then suddenly everybody's looking at it going, I'm not going to get anything. So then they become much more interested in taking.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cards that you have to play with a certain meta that just won't just ruin it. Obviously the card's not great unless people are there to have fun. I've seen so many times people just whiff on this card because nobody is doing anything. People are like, oh, I'm not going to do that because then you'll get them over, and it's just come on, just play with me. Play this game, That's why I love it.
Right, and I will say, in a harsher meta than ours, by the time you can afford to play Tempting Contract, a lot of players just won't give you the benefit. They won't give you that one, because they've already got a mana base. They can already cast cards, because odds are they've already got 4 lands out as well. A card like this would be way more... I would prefer to see it as something where you get to have it for 3 turns, but it only costs 1 mana, because you would get a ton of mana early on. Once I got through the legendary creatures, that's sort of when I hit on Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider.
Yeah.
And this thing is a beast. For 6 mana, 2 of them are green. It's a 6/6 with trample and haste. If you would put 1 or more creatures one or more counters on a permanent or player. Put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. And if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half of that rounded down. When an opponent gets to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature just because of the ability, no, they get nothing. And when you put one, you get one. I love that. I love that.
It's an awesome card.
It is. And so much of that pushed me to look at a lot of the +1/+1 counter cards that were available. And I mean, for the most part, most of them fit with the theme of the deck anyway. I'm looking to get a lot of creatures out and, start applying a bit of a beat down, and an extra +1/+1 counter here and there certainly doesn't hurt. So, and I've also got Eliwick Tumblestrum, a planeswalker that costs 4, but more importantly, Eliwick starts with 4 loyalty. Now, Vorinclex says any permanent. So when Eliwick comes into play, as long as Vorinclex is out, Eliwick comes in with 8 loyalty. And Eliwick's ultimate is only 7. So you can then use the ultimate immediately, and Eliwick is still alive. Vorinclex also says, it doesn't say as part of an activation. So when you get like doubling season, you get to double the loyalty on a planeswalker when the planeswalker comes in, but you don't double the loyalty every time when you use the +1 ability. You don't get 2 counters for that. With Vorinclex, you do, because it does not specify.
Yikes.
So Eliwick would then add 2 to venture into and you venture into the dungeon. Vorinclex is a beast, and like I mentioned,
yeah, and I mean even Eliwick's emblem says creatures you control have trample and haste and get +2/+2 for each differently named dungeon you've completed, which I mean are 3 possible dungeons within this confines. But the more emblems you get, it's then +4/+4 for each dungeon, +6/+6, etc. But at the very least, all of your creatures then have trample and haste going forward,
right? Which
is good.
Right. Now, I will say, I do have a small dungeon package in the deck. Eliwick's part of that. There's Wandering Troubadour and Varus Silvery Moon Ranger, which I particularly like because whenever you cast a creature or a planeswalker spell, venture into the dungeon, it can only trigger once per turn, but I mean, you are likely casting a creature almost every turn, so you should move through the dungeon pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's on cast too, so it's not even like it doesn't have to resolve. Right,
and I've also added in my land base because, well, hey, I'm mono green, so I can afford to put in some lands that don't tap for green. I included Dungeon Descent, and it fits the theme. Spend 4, tap an untapped legendary creature you control, venture into the dungeon. You can only activate it as a sorcery, but it's a way to get things moving. And if you've got enough spare mana, you can certainly consider that.
It's a way to get things moving, or if you have Varus out, it's a way to like finish a dungeon. Because Varus says once you finish a dungeon, you get a wolf out of it.
Yeah. One of the ones I really got a kick out of was Sword of Hours, which is not green, but it's a piece of equipment. It costs 2. The equip cost is 2, and it says whenever equipped creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you're not putting the counter on the Sword of Hours, you're putting the counter on the creature. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage, roll a d12. If the result is greater than the damage dealt, or the result is 12, double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. Obviously, there's diminishing returns, but at an equip cost of 2, it is very easy to move it from one creature to another. I'll take my chances with with creatures that are coming in with 1 +1/+1 counter. I mean, okay, fine. So
yeah.
The other one that, as far as the +1/+1 counter theme in the deck, Paradox Zone. It's an enchantment. It costs 5. One of them has to be green. Now, it says Paradox Zone enters the battlefield with a growth counter, unless Vorinclex is out, in which case it enters the battlefield with 2 counters. You see where I'm going to go with this. At the beginning of your end step, double the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone, and then double it again, because that's what's happening here. Then create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. So if Vorinclex is out, you play Paradox Zone, you put 2 growth counters on it. At the beginning of your end step, you double that. So put 2 more.
To 4.
But you're not putting 2, you're putting 4. So now you've got 6 tokens.
6.
Then you put out your fractal token, and you put 6, no wait, double that, it's 12. So your 5 mana Paradox Zone with Vorinclex out gets you a, what did we just say, 12/12?
12/12,
Gets you a 12/12. I mean...
And that's if it's only out for a turn.
Right. That's 1 turn. Because on the next turn, you're going to put another growth counter on it. Or 2 if Vorinclex is still out. And you can see where this goes.
So now it's 8.
Now it's 8.
Yeah, and then
you double it, right? So double the 8.
No, you it's 6, and then it doubles twice. So it's 12/24, so you have a 48 out next turn.
Now, this is with Vorinclex. And I appreciate that in a deck like this one, where Vorinclex is the only creature that can do this, it's the only permanent that can do the doubling. This is a magical Christmas land scenario, because I've just described having Vorinclex and Paradox Zone out for 2 or 3 turns. However, you can run Paradox Zone with Doubling Season in your deck that has multiple ways to double counters. And it's just, this could be ridiculous. I can see Paradox Zone even going into one of my ancient decks. I've got Vorel of the Hullclade that still exists. This thing is ridiculous. And I appreciate that, these are not legendary fractals, that Paradox Zone itself does not really work with Kolvori in any sort of special way. But, this is just crazy, and in a meta that allows this sort of thing to get out of control, it's wild. So I really got a kick out of that. There's only so many legendary creatures in this particular group. So Kolvari is a little bit limiting, but once Kolvari is out, you just tap it and just do it. The card goes into your hand, so save 2 mana for your last opponent's end step. Do it then. Go through the next 6 cards, pick out a legendary creature. Hopefully you get one. Goes in your hand, the rest go on the bottom, and you just keep going. It's just a bonus. And as long as you treat it as a bonus card draw that's going to work, 4 out of 5 times that you do it, I'm okay with that. So
right?
Yeah. The other card I put in the deck that isn't green that I wanted to talk a little bit about was Lithoform Engine. I'm not going to go crazy on this. It has a number of abilities. Most of them involve copying an activated ability, an instant, a sorcery, or a permanent. And again, with this deck, that works out really well. With other decks, this thing is just nuts. And you can tell from its, $11 price tag, that I am hardly the first person to be telling anybody this. So, but it's just, again, it's something to keep in mind. I get a real kick out of this. Do remember though, if you're copying target permanent spell you control, don't copy your legendary creatures. This does not make the copy non-legendary. It is a copy, so you will lose it immediately. But
I've seen this card work on Arena a bunch, and another thing to keep in mind as well is to make sure that you use it while the spell is still on the stack, because you're not copying target permanents, you're copying target permanent spells. Or whatever. So you can't, once it's on the battlefield, you're not copying it. It's a fascinating card.
I think the last one I want to go over is another card which, again, you can tell my fascination with the doubling. Exponential Growth. It's a sorcery. It costs XX green, and it says until end of turn, double target creature's power X times. If X is 1, in other words, if this spell costs 4 mana, you're doubling the target creature's power 1 time. So for 4 mana, you're doubling a creature's power. Okay. But for 6, you're doubling it twice. Just take a 2/2. If doubling it twice brings it to a 4/4 and an 8/8. So for 6 mana, you're turning your 2/2 into an 8/8. Surely you've got at least a 4/4 creature out here when you're doing this. You're probably going after a 6/6 creature. In which case, you're doubling it twice. Well, okay, now you've got a 24/24. And that's for 6 mana. That doesn't even count as exponential growth. Why not play it for 8? Because this is where we're going with this. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that you're going to get 10 and 12. And I mean, there are times when that will happen, and that's great. But, I mean, I don't think spending 6 mana or 8 mana on this card is too out of the realm of possibility. And when you hit that double for the 3rd time, I mean, anything gets, even your 2/2 creature, which goes from a 4/4 to an 8/8 to a 16/16. Even a 2/2 creature getting doubled 3 times gets crazy. So
the card that caught my eye in this deck that I hadn't heard of was Inspiring Call. Inspiring Call may be old, but it's still
is
great.
It old?
Yeah, it's from Tarkir.
Oh no!
It's all good.
Sorry, folks.
It was within this set of time. It was printed in Zendikar Rising Commander.
Okay.
Inspiring Call. The fact that it's still caught me by surprise as like a card that I feel like I haven't heard too much about, especially in this deck, means something. It's like a really cool card. For 2 and a green, it's an instant draw card. For each creature you control with +1/+1 counter on it, those creatures gain indestructible till end of turn. This deck, I mean, for 3 mana, you can draw 6 cards, 7 cards, easy. If you're doing the +1/+1 counter thing. It's fascinating.
Right, and it gives them the indestructible, so you can use it on the opponent's turn, you can use it on your turn, you can use it as a surprise for combat, and you get to draw a pile of cards. It's sort of all kinds of crazy, so...
Yeah, the indestructible really kind of gets you out of nowhere. It's surprising, it's helpful.
It does.
It can be defensive or offensive, and it's very
rarely offensive.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to be offensive when you're just going in for massive amounts and you don't want to lose those big creatures.
Right.
But, I mean, for 3 mana, you rarely get that much value out of green instants.
And in case you were wondering, folks, yes, Old Gnawbone is in the deck. I mean, It's green. You don't get a lot of flyers, so I take them when I can get them. A legendary dragon for 7. 2 of them are green. It's a 7/7. It's a flyer. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. In this deck, I'm not sure how good this is, just because there's no way to really abuse this, especially when you're that late in the game. I mean, you already have 7 mana. So if I can get through and hit with my creatures for 10, I get 10 treasures. Other than being able to cast another spell, it doesn't create that situation where it's like, ooh, other than, I mean, I guess you could flood it onto exponential growth, but, then you're going to want to sit on those treasures until the next turn so you can cast the exponential growth before combat. But,
Yeah, you've got a handful of, like, X spells in here that could really use that help.
Right, and I do have a lot of expensive cards, too, that are, a lot of high mana value cards, so.
Yeah, Triplicate Titan.
Yes.
But I think it's, for me, it goes in any green deck that you can afford to put it in. But I just love that treasure.
Yeah, well, and who doesn't? And I will take all kinds of ramp. I will say that the ramp in this deck obviously was far less about artifacts. There's a couple of ways to get treasure, but it really focused a lot more on, I tried to focus it on getting lands. Bounty of Skemfar, I really like the idea of that. For 3 mana, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You can put a land from among them onto the battlefield tapped. and an elf card from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. But it says any land. So in this deck, it's likely just going to be a basic. But in a lot of other decks, especially 2-color decks, where you're running a lot of non-basics, you're getting that card into play tapped. Now, I know it's tapped, but I still like that. I think that's great. But then I've got Circle of Dreams Druid. Add green for each creature you control. Find the Path. The enchanted land has tap for 2 green. There it is. Jaspera Sentinel. It's 1 mana for an elf rogue with reach. It's a 1/2 creature. I don't care about any of that. Tap an untapped creature you control. Add 1 mana of any color. I love the idea that you can, that this will allow you to ramp into other colors. Less, a little less exciting for this deck, but it does add the mana. So I'm all for that. So, and then the other one I thought was interesting was Roiling Regrowth. Sack a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. It's very similar to Harrow, and I've always liked Harrow. I think the difference with Harrow is I think they come into play untapped, but I could be wrong. Yeah, with Harrow they come into play untapped, but honestly, I'll take that. For I'm getting the extra land, and it works out fairly well. So I'll still do that. I mean, you're playing it at instant speed, so you're probably playing it on your opponent's end step. In which case, you're just going to get them back untapped anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Andy, I don't have a lot more.
What?
I say I don't have a lot more to add in. I mean, I think some of these are, our audience can easily go through this and see a couple of crazy ones. There's the Belt of Giant Strength, which I got a kick out of. Equipped creature has a base power and toughness 10/10. The equip cost, though, is 10. This ability costs X less to activate, where X is the power of the creature it targets.
Oh, okay. So, it's the difference to make it up to 10.
Right. So if you've already
cool.
got a 7/7 creature, it only costs 3, and now you have a 10/10. So, you take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I mean, with +1/+1 counters, that's always good,
Right, and I look at, when you look at some of the fractals, so if I can get a 12/12 fractal, then the equip cost is 0. But then the base becomes a 10/10, and all of the fractals' power and toughness is in the +1/+1 counters, so it would get all of them. So if you've got a fractal that's a 12/12, it's now a 22/22. It's just straight 10/10 bonus. So
I think, I think along the same lines too. I mean, in terms of it being a Strixhaven commander card, Pest Infestation, I love. It's 1x. It's green XX. Destroy up to X target artifacts and/or enchantments. Which, I mean, everybody always needs to be playing more enchantment removal anyway.
Right.
And obviously now with treasures being so prevalent, artifact removal is always good. Destroy up to X target artifacts and/or enchantments. Create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life.
Right.
It helps with the go wide strategy. It helps clear out treasures. It helps clear out certain enchantments that may be pesky. I love this card, and I wish it was an instant, but can't always win.
Right. So, but yeah, I think it was fun, and I got to like I said, I got a chance to look at a lot of cards that I have not seen, and added a whole bunch of things to my cart for the next purchase. So.
Yeah, I love this time of year for that reason, to just kind of go through what's rotating out, seeing what's starting to get less attention, and understanding kind of where things can kind of fall into place. It's it's kind of like the opposite issue of or not necessarily the opposite issue, but it's an inverse issue of how fast we're getting product is once kind of standard rotates through. And obviously Commander's the biggest format, but I think it's still something to take a look at, or at least give you a reason to look at some of these cards that either are getting forgotten about or kind of understanding where everything kind of fits in terms of synergies.
Right.
But I had a lot of fun with this one. I was surprised to see how many AFR cards and how many Strixhaven cards I took and found and used in my deck.
Right.
But I think it really kind of gives me hope in terms of the way that they're starting, or not necessarily starting, the way that they're bringing the Commander product and format in general, how they're designing around big plays with big costs rather than trying to make everything so neat.
Right.
But yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Well, Andy, I think we can probably wrap this one up because we've left you with a rough editing job for this one.
So we'll quickly wrap this one up. But, we are taking the next 2 weeks off of regular episodes. I presume we'll be back in a couple of weeks. If my calculations are correct, today's the 28th. We will be back with regular episodes on the 19th of October. We'll be back with cool things about the Unfinity stuff. Maybe. If we like it. We'll see.
Oh, man. I can't wait. Can't wait.
In the meantime, we'll have some short episodes for you. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. If you want to see our deck lists, they'll be in the show notes. If you want to send us your own deck lists for this challenge, we would love to see them. Share this with your friends. Share this with your family if they like Magic. They'll love us. Because, we're just a couple of cool guys just hanging out, talking about Magic. Yeah, it's been a great season. I am excited to see what we have planned next, which is to say I am excited to plan what we will plan next. But that's going to do it for us this week at Temple of Falsepod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again for listening. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the Temple.
Bye!
Wait, before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter @falsepodmtg. Bruce is @manaburned, and I'm @AndyWeekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, like, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the Temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!